June 9th, 1982, 14 hours, Bekaa Valley, Lebanon. Inside the command post of a Soviet-built SA-6 gainful surface-to-air missile battery, a Syrian radar operator monitored his scope with absolute confidence. The most sophisticated air defense network ever deployed outside the Warsaw Pact surrounded his position. 19 integrated SAM batteries equipped with systems that had devastated Israeli aircraft during the 1973 Yom Kippur War covered the valley in overlapping engagement envelopes. Below his position, SA-2 Guideline and SA-3 GO-A batteries provided low-altitude coverage. Above, his SA-6 system could engage targets from 50 FT to 45,000 AS FT at ranges exceeding 15 meteor. Soviet advisors had assured Syrian air defense commanders that this network was impenetrable. The Syrian operator had trained in the Soviet Union under instructors who spoke of integrated air defense with reverence bordering on worship. They called it the definitive counter to Western air power, a layered system that made penetration impossible without catastrophic losses. The 1973 war had validated Soviet doctrine completely. In the first 3 days of combat, Syrian and Egyptian SAM batteries had destroyed over 50 Israeli aircraft, forcing Israel to suspend offensive operations until American resupply arrived. Soviet instructors had drilled one certainty into every SAM operator: follow doctrine precisely, coordinate with adjacent batteries, and no enemy air force could survive. What the Syrian radar operator did not know, what Soviet advisors embedded with his command had failed to comprehend, was that within 4 hours, every battery in the Bekaa Valley would be destroyed. Israel was about to demonstrate that Soviet air defense doctrine, perfected over 3 decades and validated in multiple conflicts, had become obsolete. The transformation from Syrian confidence to documented Israeli air superiority would require less time than a single operational shift. The engagement would expose technological disparities that Soviet propaganda had concealed and tactical predictabilities that Israeli intelligence had exploited. The myth of Soviet air defense invincibility would die in Lebanese airspace that afternoon. This is the story of how Soviet surface-to-air missile technology, once feared as the definitive counter to Western air power, became a case study in military obsolescence. Between 14 Na and 18 Ar on June 9th, 1982, Israeli Air Force operations destroyed 19 Syrian SAM batteries comprising 86 individual missile launchers. Syrian interceptors attempting to defend the air defense network lost 29 aircraft. Israel lost 0 aircraft to enemy action. Soviet military observers embedded with Syrian forces reported directly to Moscow that their integrated air defense doctrine had been defeated in 4 hours. The engagement exposed not merely technological inferiority, but fundamental doctrinal failure. How American electronic warfare technology, Israeli tactical innovation, and Syrian adherence to predictable Soviet doctrine combined to produce the most one-sided air defense engagement in modern warfare. Soviet surface-to-air missile development emerged from the same humiliation that drove MiG-25 interceptor design. On May 1st, 1960, a Soviet SA-2 Guideline missile detonated near Gary Powers' U-2 reconnaissance aircraft at 70,500 RFT over Sverdlovsk, proving that Soviet air defense could reach American strategic reconnaissance platforms operating at altitudes Western planners had considered untouchable. The SA-2, designated S-75 Divina in Soviet service, became the foundation of Soviet air defense doctrine for 2 decades. Vietnam validated the system under combat conditions. Between 1965 and 1968, North Vietnamese SA-2 batteries forced American tactical aircraft to fly low-altitude penetration profiles, exposing them to conventional anti-aircraft fire. The United States Air Force lost approximately 110 aircraft to SA-2 missiles during the Vietnam War. Soviet advisors studying engagement results concluded that properly deployed SAM batteries could deny enemy aircraft access to defended airspace without requiring air superiority. The 1973 Yom Kippur War demonstrated Soviet air defense doctrine at peak effectiveness. Syrian and Egyptian forces deployed SA-2, SA-3, and the newly introduced SA-6 gainful batteries in coordinated networks covering the Golan Heights and Suez Canal. In the first 3 days of combat, Israeli Air Force losses exceeded 50 aircraft, forcing suspension of offensive air operations. Israeli F-4 Phantoms and A-4 Skyhawks, attempting to support ground forces under attack, flew directly into engagement envelopes where multiple SAM batteries could engage simultaneously. Israeli pilots who survived described the experience as flying through walls of missiles. The SA-6 gainful represented a significant technological advancement over earlier Soviet systems. Mobile and mounted on tracked vehicles, the SA-6 could relocate after engaging targets, complicating Israeli targeting. Its engagement envelope covered altitudes from 50 ft to 45,000 ft at ranges exceeding 15 nm. The straight flush radar could track multiple targets simultaneously and guide 3 missiles per launcher. Soviet military journals published articles praising the SA-6 as proof that Soviet air defense technology had achieved parity with Western offensive capabilities. By 1982, Soviet air defense doctrine emphasized integrated networks where multiple battery types provided overlapping coverage at different altitudes. Syrian commanders, advised by Soviet officers who had studied 1973 results, believed the Bekaa Valley deployment represented the definitive application of this doctrine. The Israeli Defense Forces emerged from the 1973 Yom Kippur War with documented proof that Soviet SAM batteries could destroy their air force. Israeli aircraft losses in the first 72 hours of combat exceeded total losses from the 1967 Six-Day War. The lesson was absolute. Soviet air defenses required a technological counter, not tactical adaptation. Israeli military leadership made a strategic decision that would define their approach to air warfare for decades. They would not seek numerical parity with Arab air forces. They would pursue technological dominance that rendered enemy numerical advantages irrelevant. American technology transfer provided the foundation. The United States, recognizing Israel as a strategic ally facing Soviet-equipped adversaries, approved sale of advanced electronic warfare systems in 1974. Israeli F-4 Phantoms received ALQ-99 tactical jamming pods capable of disrupting Soviet radar across multiple frequency bands. The pods, developed for United States Navy EA-6B Prowler aircraft, could detect radar emissions, analyze frequencies, and broadcast interference that rendered enemy tracking unreliable. Israeli aircraft also received ALQ-119 self-protection jammers that created false targets on enemy radar screens. The AGM-78 Standard anti-radiation missile gave Israeli strike aircraft the ability to destroy SAM batteries from beyond their engagement range. The missile, equipped with a passive radar seeker, homed on emissions from active Soviet radars with precision measured in meters. Launch range exceeded 35 km, allowing Israeli aircraft to fire from altitudes and distances where Syrian SAM operators could not respond. The AGM-45 Shrike, a smaller anti-radiation missile, provided additional capability against shorter-range systems. Israeli innovation complemented American technology. Israeli aircraft industries developed the Samson and Delilah reconnaissance drones in the late 1970s specifically to saturate enemy radar screens. The drones, equipped with radar reflectors calibrated to mimic F-4 Phantom signatures, could loiter over hostile territory for hours, forcing SAM batteries to activate radars and reveal positions. Israeli electronic intelligence aircraft collected these emissions, building comprehensive databases of Syrian radar characteristics. By 1982, Israeli F-4 Phantoms and F-16 Fighting Falcons carried electronic countermeasure suites that Syrian air defense operators could not defeat. Israeli pilots trained extensively against captured Soviet equipment, understanding enemy capabilities intimately. The technology existed. The tactical doctrine existed. Israel required only the operational opportunity to validate both against an integrated Soviet air defense network. Syria began deploying SAM batteries across the Bekaa Valley in late 1981 under direct Soviet supervision. The deployment was strategic, designed to deny Israeli aircraft access to Lebanese airspace and protect Syrian ground forces operating below. Soviet advisors from the 18th Independent Radio Technical Brigade arrived in Damascus in November 1981 to oversee battery positioning and coordinate radar coverage. By March 1982, 19 SAM batteries occupied positions throughout the valley, creating what Soviet planners described as defense in depth. The battery composition reflected Soviet integrated air defense doctrine. 6 SA-2 guideline batteries provided long-range high-altitude coverage. 8 SA-3 GOA batteries covered medium altitudes and filled gaps in SA-2 coverage. 5 SA-6 gainful batteries, the most capable systems Syria possessed, provided mobile protection against low-altitude penetrators. Total launcher count reached 86 individual missile systems, each capable of engaging multiple targets. Syrian Air Defense Command established coordination centers where Soviet advisors monitored all batteries simultaneously, ensuring overlapping fields of fire and mutual support. Soviet confidence in the deployment was explicit. Colonel General Yevgeny Yurasov, Soviet Air Defense Forces advisor to Syria, told Syrian commanders in April 1982 that the Bekaa Valley network represented the most advanced air defense deployment outside Warsaw Pact nations. Syrian officers, remembering 1973's success against Israeli aircraft, believed their air defenses were impenetrable. Each battery could engage targets its radars detected. Overlapping coverage meant Israeli aircraft would face engagement from multiple directions simultaneously. Syrian air defense doctrine, copied directly from Soviet manuals, prescribed coordinated response to any penetration attempt. Israeli reconnaissance aircraft, orbiting over northern Israel throughout early 1982, recorded every Syrian radar emission with systematic precision. Israeli electronic intelligence collection against Syrian SAM batteries began the moment the first SA-6 launcher arrived in the Bekaa Valley. Boeing 707 aircraft, modified for signals intelligence missions, orbited over northern Israel, their receivers cataloging every radar emission Syrian operators broadcast. Each time a Syrian battery activated its straight flush tracking radar or fan-song guidance system, Israeli equipment recorded frequency, pulse repetition rate, scan pattern, and power output. The data, transmitted in real time to Israeli Air Force Intelligence Headquarters at Tel Aviv, built a comprehensive electronic order of battle. Syrian battery commanders, following Soviet doctrine precisely, activated radars on predictable schedules for training and readiness checks. Israeli analysts studying the patterns identified Syrian operational procedures with precision. Batteries activated radars at specific times. Operators followed identical startup sequences. Radar scan patterns matched Soviet technical manuals exactly. The predictability that Soviet doctrine demanded for coordination became vulnerability when facing an adversary who studied patterns systematically. Israeli ground stations along the Lebanese border monitored Syrian command and control frequencies continuously. Syrian air defense commanders coordinated battery responses Using radio communications, Israeli signals intelligence could intercept and decrypt. The command structure, hierarchical and rigid according to Soviet organizational principles, meant every engagement order flowed through identifiable channels. Israeli intelligence mapped the entire network, identifying which commanders controlled which batteries, which frequencies carried tactical orders, which backup systems existed. By June 1982, Israeli Air Force intelligence possessed complete electronic signatures for every Syrian radar operating in the Bekaa Valley. Analysts could identify individual batteries by subtle variations in radar emissions. They understood Syrian engagement procedures, response timelines, and coordination protocols. Syrian operators, executing Soviet doctrine with disciplined precision, had provided Israel with everything required to destroy them. The intelligence collection effort, methodical and comprehensive, transformed Syrian air defenses from threats into cataloged targets awaiting destruction. Israeli Air Force planners developing the operational concept for destroying Syrian SAM batteries rejected conventional strike doctrine entirely. Traditional approaches called for penetrating enemy air defenses through speed, altitude, terrain masking, or saturation attacks accepting losses. Major General David Ivory, Israeli Air Force commander, directed his staff to design an operation that destroyed Syrian batteries without losing Israeli aircraft. The requirement seemed impossible given Syrian defensive density, but Israeli planners possessed advantages Syrian commanders could not counter. The operational plan exploited Syrian predictability systematically. Phase 1 employed Samson and Delilah drones to saturate Syrian radar screens with false targets. The drones, equipped with radar reflectors producing signatures identical to F-4 Phantoms, would force Syrian batteries to activate tracking radars and prepare for engagement. Syrian operators, trained to respond to inbound threats according to Soviet doctrine, would follow procedures exactly. Each activated radar would broadcast its location to Israeli electronic warfare aircraft waiting beyond Syrian engagement range. Phase 2 required patience and precision. Israeli F-4 Phantoms carrying AGM-78 Standard and AGM-45 Shrike anti-radiation missiles would orbit at altitudes exceeding 25,000 ft beyond Syrian SAM engagement envelopes. When Syrian radars activated to engage the drone swarm, Israeli aircraft would fire anti-radiation missiles programmed to home on specific radar frequencies. The missiles, accelerating to Mach 2.5, would destroy Syrian radars before operators could shut down and relocate. Launch range exceeded 35 km, providing Israeli pilots complete safety. Phase 3 addressed batteries surviving the initial armed strikes. F-4 Phantoms, loaded with CBU-58 cluster bombs, would attack remaining launchers and command vehicles. The cluster munitions, effective against dispersed targets, would destroy equipment. Syrian crews could not relocate quickly enough. Coordinating these phases required technology Syria did not possess. Israeli E-2C Hawkeye, airborne early warning aircraft operating over the Mediterranean, would track every element simultaneously. The Hawkeye's radar could monitor Syrian air defenses, Israeli strike aircraft, and Syrian interceptors attempting to interfere. Controllers aboard the E-2C would direct the entire operation in real time, adjusting tactics as Syrian responses developed. Israeli F-15 Eagles and F-16 Fighting Falcons would maintain combat air patrol above the engagement zone, positioned to intercept Syrian MiGs scrambling from Damascus area bases. The fighter screen ensured Syrian interceptors could not disrupt strike aircraft prosecuting SAM batteries. Israeli Air Force Commander David Ivry, reviewing the final operational plan in early June 1982, understood the stakes completely. He told planning staff assembled at Tel Aviv headquarters that execution required absolute precision across multiple domains simultaneously. perfect coordination, perfect timing, perfect execution. The Samson and Delilah drones, each measuring approximately 12 ft in length with wingspans of 14 ft, launched from northern Israel at 13:45 on June 9, 1982. Radar reflectors mounted on their fuselages produce signatures matching F-4 Phantom fighters exactly. Syrian radar operators monitoring approaches from Israel detected multiple inbound contacts at 14 Dogs, crossing into Lebanese airspace at altitudes between 15,000 and $20,000 FT. Syrian Air Defense Command, observing the contacts on coordination displays, initiated standard response procedures. Battery commanders received orders to activate tracking radars and prepare missiles for launch. SA-6 batteries positioned near Rayak activated their straight flush radars first, attempting to acquire the approaching targets for engagement. SA-2 and SA-3 batteries followed within minutes, their fan song and low-blow radars sweeping designated sectors. Syrian operators struggled to distinguish actual aircraft from electronic phantoms. The drone radar signatures appeared identical to manned fighters. Flight profiles matched typical Israeli attack approaches. Syrian doctrine provided no procedures for distinguishing real threats from deception. Battery commanders, faced with multiple inbound contacts, followed training exactly. Activate all radars. Acquire all targets. Prepare for coordinated engagement. Israeli Boeing 707 electronic intelligence aircraft orbiting 60 miles west over the Mediterranean recorded every Syrian radar activation with precision. The emissions, analyzed in real time by onboard systems, matched databases compiled over months of collection. Syrian batteries were revealing themselves exactly as Israeli planners predicted. Targeting solutions updated automatically as each radar broadcasted its location. Israeli F-4 Phantoms carrying anti-radiation missiles, orbiting at $27,000 FT beyond Syrian engagement range, received coordinates for immediate strikes. At 14:17, Israeli F-4 Phantom crews flying at $27,000 FT beyond Syrian SAM engagement range received targeting coordinates from E-2C Hawkeye controllers orbiting over the Mediterranean. Syrian SA-6 batteries positioned near Rayak had activated their straight flush tracking radars at 935 GHz, attempting to engage the drone formations below. The radars broadcast their exact positions with precision measured in meters. Israeli weapons systems operators monitoring displays showing Syrian radar locations overlaid on digital maps, designated targets for immediate engagement. Captain Amos Ben Avraham, leading a flight of 4 F-4Es carrying AGM-78 standard anti-radiation missiles, received authorization to engage at 14:19. His weapons system operator locked the AGM-78 seeker head onto Syrian SA-6 emissions. Launch parameters confirmed. At 14:21, Ben Avraham fired 2 AGM-78s from 33 mi range. The missiles, accelerating to Mach 2.5, climbed to 60,000 FT before descending toward the radiating Syrian radar. Flight time measured 47 seconds. The Syrian SA-6 battery commander near Rayak focused on engaging what he believed were Israeli fighters approaching from the west, never detected the missiles descending from above. His radar operators, watching screens filled with drone signatures, maintained tracking solutions on multiple contacts. At 14:22, the first AGM-78's 215 LB fragmentation warhead detonated 12 FT from the straight flush radar antenna. Shrapnel shredded the antenna array and penetrated the radar vehicle, killing 2 operators instantly. The second missile detonated 8 seconds later, destroying the battery's command vehicle. Israeli strike aircraft fired 64 anti-radiation missiles in the first 28 minutes of engagement. AGM-78. Standards targeted SA-6 batteries exclusively, exploiting their longer range and larger warheads. AGM-45 Shrikes engaged SA-2 and SA-3 radars at closer ranges. Syrian battery commanders, realizing their radars were being targeted, faced an impossible choice: shut down radars and lose ability to engage threats, maintain radar operation, and provide homing beacons for Israeli missiles. Syrian Air Defense Command attempted to coordinate responses through radio communications, ordering batteries to activate radars in sequence rather than simultaneously. Israeli electronic warfare aircraft monitoring Syrian command frequencies jammed the transmissions immediately. Syrian battalion commanders could not communicate with battery positions. Individual batteries operated independently, following final orders received before jamming began. By 1445, 11 Syrian SAM batteries had lost radar capability. Israeli F-4 Phantoms carrying CBU-58 cluster munitions began attacking surviving launchers. The cluster bombs, releasing 670 individual submunitions over target areas, destroyed missile launchers. Syrian crews could not relocate. Syrian SA-6 batteries, mobile by design, attempted to reposition after losing radars. Israeli infrared reconnaissance detected the movement and directed strike aircraft to new positions. Syrian MiG-21 and MiG-23 fighters scrambled from Dumar and Saikal air bases at 1530, attempting to intercept Israeli strike aircraft. Israeli F-15 Eagles, maintaining combat air patrol at 35,000 FT, detected the Syrian formations at 87-meter range. Captain Rami Harpaz, flying F-15 number 957, acquired 4 MiG-21s, climbing through 18,000 FT. He fired 2 AIM-7F Sparrow missiles at 42-meter range. Both missiles guided to separate targets. 2 Syrian MiG-21s exploded before their pilots detected radar lock warnings. The remaining Syrian fighters scattered, attempting evasive maneuvers that accomplished nothing against missiles approaching at Mach 4. Israeli F-16 Fighting Falcons engaged Syrian MiG-23 formations, attempting to reach the SAM engagement zone from the northeast. Lieutenant Eitan Ben Eliyahu, flying F-16 number 243, destroyed 3 MiG-23s in a single engagement lasting 73 seconds. Syrian pilots, trained by Soviet instructors in close-range combat tactics, could not employ those tactics against Israeli pilots engaging from beyond visual range. By 1630, Syrian Air Defense Command had lost contact with 17 of 19 batteries. Syrian Air Force operations suspended further interceptor launches after losing 23 aircraft without achieving a single confirmed kill. Israeli strike aircraft conducted final confirmation sweeps across the Bekaa Valley, photographing destroyed batteries and attacking any equipment showing signs of activity. At 18 Hochie, Israeli Air Force Commander David Ivory received preliminary battle damage assessment reports at Tel Aviv headquarters. 19 SAM batteries engaged, 86 launchers targeted, all objectives destroyed or damaged beyond operational capability. Israeli aircraft lost to enemy action, 0. Israeli Air Force intelligence officers, compiling after-action reports through the night of June 9th, documented the engagement with systematic precision. The statistics represented the most one-sided air defense engagement in modern military history. Syrian losses totaled 19 SAM batteries destroyed, comprising 86 individual missile launchers rendered inoperable. Syrian Air Force losses reached 29 aircraft, 17 MiG-21s, 11 MiG-23s, and 1 Su-22 ground attack aircraft. Syrian air defense personnel casualties exceeded 190 killed and wounded. Syrian command and control infrastructure across the Bekaa Valley suffered complete disruption. Israeli losses to enemy action measured 0 aircraft, 0 pilots killed or captured. Time elapsed from first drone deployment to final confirmation strike. 4 hours, 15 minutes. Israeli munitions expenditure included 64 anti-radiation missiles, 38 cluster bomb units, and 92 air-to-air missiles. Israeli aircraft involved in the operation totaled 96 F-4 Phantoms for strike missions F-15 Eagles and F-16 Fighting Falcons for air superiority, E-2C Hawkeyes for coordination, and Boeing 707s for electronic warfare. Soviet military observers embedded with Syrian forces at Damascus transmitted initial reports to Moscow on June 10th. The reports, portions of which were declassified after the Soviet Union's collapse, acknowledged complete failure of integrated air defense doctrine against coordinated electronic warfare attack. Soviet advisors had witnessed Syrian batteries following prescribed procedures exactly, yet being destroyed systematically. The Washington Post, citing Pentagon sources, reported on June 15th that Soviet military planners were stunned by the precision and efficiency of Israeli operations. A classified Central Intelligence Agency assessment, declassified in 1997, concluded that Soviet integrated air defense doctrine had proven ineffective when adversaries possessed advanced electronic warfare capabilities and precision anti-radiation weapons. Marshal Nikolai Ogarkov, chief of the Soviet General Staff, personally reviewed Syrian air defense performance records in late June 1982. His report to the Defense Council, portions revealed through Russian archives after 1991, recommended comprehensive revision of Soviet air defense deployment doctrine and accelerated development of systems resistant to electronic countermeasures. American electronic warfare technology had exposed vulnerabilities Soviet designers had not anticipated, and Syrian operators could not counter. Syrian MiG-21 and MiG-23 fighters scrambling from Damascus area bases at 15:30 faced Israeli F-15 Eagles and F-16 Fighting Falcons that had established combat air patrol positions 2 hours earlier. Syrian pilots, trained by Soviet instructors using Soviet doctrine, flew in standard four-aircraft formations designed for mutual support against numerically superior enemies. Soviet tactical manuals emphasized coordinated turning engagements where numbers and maneuverability would overcome individual aircraft performance disadvantages. Syrian pilots expected visual range combat where their training would matter. Israeli F-15 pilots, monitoring Syrian air bases with APG-63 pulse Doppler radars capable of detecting targets at ranges exceeding 100 mm, observed Syrian formations climbing from runways before Syrian pilots completed their departure briefings. Captain Rami Harpaz, flying F-15 number 957 at $35,000 FT, acquired 4 MiG-21s at 87 ME range, while the Syrian formation was still climbing through 18,000 LFT. Harpaz selected 2 targets and fired AIM-7F Sparrow missiles at 42 ME range, beyond the detection capability of Syrian radar warning receivers. The first Sparrow's 88 lb continuous rod warhead detonated 6 FT from a MiG-21's cockpit. The second missile destroyed another MiG-21 11 seconds later. Syrian pilots in the surviving aircraft, detecting explosions but not understanding their source, broke formation and descended, attempting standard evasion procedures against threats they could not identify. Israeli F-16 Fighting Falcons engaged Syrian MiG-23 formations, attempting to reach the Bekaa Valley from northeastern approaches. Lieutenant Eitan Ben Eliyahu, flying at $28,000 FT with his AN APG-66 radar tracking 8 contacts, fired 3 AIM-7 missiles in rapid succession against Syrian fighters flying predictable Soviet intercept profiles. All 3 missiles guided to impact. Syrian MiG-23 pilots, equipped with Sapphire-23 radars, effective only at ranges under 30 meter, never acquired Israeli aircraft launching from twice that distance. By 17 Shawwal, Syrian Air Force operations ceased all interceptor missions. 29 Syrian aircraft destroyed. Syrian pilots killed or captured. 21. Israeli F-15 and F-16 losses to air combat, 0. Syrian pilots interviewed years later described engagements as incomprehensible, watching squadron mates explode without detecting threats or receiving warnings. Soviet military observers embedded with Syrian air defense forces transmitted reports to Moscow on June 10, 1982. The assessments, portions of which were declassified through Russian archives after the Soviet Union's dissolution, acknowledged that fundamental assumptions underlying Soviet air defense doctrine had been proven catastrophically wrong. Integrated SAM networks could be defeated through coordinated electronic attack. Numerical superiority provided no protection against precision weapons launched beyond engagement range. Predictable doctrine created systematic vulnerabilities that adversaries with superior intelligence collection could exploit completely. Colonel General Yevgeny Yurasov, senior Soviet Air Defense Forces advisor to Syria, submitted a classified report to Marshal of Aviation Alexander Koldenov on June 12th. The document, obtained by Western intelligence in 1989, detailed Syrian battery performance with brutal honesty. Syrian crews had followed Soviet doctrine precisely. Battery commanders had coordinated responses according to prescribed procedures. Radar operators had executed engagement sequences exactly as Soviet training required. Every Syrian action had matched Soviet expectations. Israeli electronic warfare had rendered those actions suicidal. Pentagon analysts studying Israeli combat reports recognized immediate validation of American electronic warfare investment. The United States had spent approximately $4.2 billion developing anti-radiation missiles, jamming systems, and electronic intelligence platforms between 1974 and 1982. Israeli operations demonstrated these systems could destroy Soviet air defenses systematically. Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger, briefing President Ronald Reagan on June 16th, characterized the Bekaa Valley engagement as proof that American technology provided decisive advantages over Soviet systems. Marshal Nikolai Ogarkov, chief of the Soviet General Staff, convened emergency meetings with air defense designers and doctrine writers throughout late June 1982. His directives, preserved in Soviet military archives, demanded immediate revision of deployment procedures and accelerated development of countermeasures against Western electronic warfare. The S-300 air defense system, under development since 1969, received priority funding for radar systems resistant to jamming and anti-radiation missiles. Soviet credibility as an arms supplier suffered immediate damage. Arab nations observing Syrian losses questioned whether Soviet equipment could protect them against Israeli or American attack. Libya, Syria, and Iraq submitted urgent requests for improved air defense systems. Soviet production capacity could not satisfy demand. Syrian requests for S-300 batteries to replace destroyed SA-6 systems received promises of delivery in 1985, 3 years distant. The gap between Syrian requirements and Soviet industrial capacity exposed limitations Moscow could not conceal. American air warfare doctrine absorbed Israeli lessons rapidly. United States Air Force Tactical Air Command disseminated Israeli combat footage and engagement analyses to fighter wings worldwide within weeks of the engagement. The destruction of Syrian SAM batteries exposed fundamental differences between American and Soviet military technology development philosophies. American designers pursued technological solutions to tactical problems, accepting higher costs to achieve superior performance. Soviet designers pursued mass production using simplified systems, accepting performance limitations to achieve numerical superiority. American electronic warfare development emphasized technical sophistication. The ALQ-99 tactical jamming pod, standard equipment on Israeli F-4 Phantoms by 1982, could simultaneously jam multiple Soviet radar frequencies while analyzing and cataloging enemy emissions. Unit cost exceeded $2.5 million per pod. The AGM-78 standard anti-radiation missile, equipped with broadband seekers capable of tracking radar emissions across multiple frequency bands, cost $1.1 million per round. Israeli pilots fired 42 AGM-78s during the Bekaa Valley engagement, representing $46.2 million in munitions expenditure for a 4-hour operation. Soviet SA-6 batteries cost approximately $8 million to produce and deploy, including launchers, missiles, and radar systems. Syrian deployment of 19 batteries represented Soviet investment of $152 million. Israeli electronic warfare systems costing less than one-third that amount destroyed the entire network in 4 hours. The mathematics of modern warfare favored technological superiority over numerical mass. Training differentials compounded equipment disparities. American fighter pilots received approximately 250 flight hours before reaching operational squadrons. Israeli pilots often exceeded 400 hours, including extensive training against captured Soviet equipment. Syrian pilots, limited by fuel shortages and maintenance difficulties, reached combat squadrons with fewer than 120 hours total flight time. Soviet doctrine emphasized standardized procedures and coordinated tactics, not individual pilot initiative. When coordination collapsed under electronic attack, Syrian pilots possessed no alternative approaches. 19 SAM batteries deployed, 86 launchers positioned. 4 hours elapsed, 19 batteries destroyed, 86 launchers eliminated, 29 Syrian aircraft shot down, 0 Israeli aircraft lost to enemy action. The statistics require no interpretation. Soviet integrated air defense doctrine, developed over 3 decades and validated in multiple conflicts, was rendered obsolete by American electronic warfare technology employed through Israeli tactical innovation. Syrian confidence in Soviet protection died in the Bekaa Valley on June 9, 1982. The wreckage scattered across Lebanese hills marked the end of Soviet air defense credibility.